Thank you, Fernando, again for this very nice introduction. And one more time, thank you for being here and sharing that kind of research that relates to growth retardation or appropriate growth of preterm babies with you. It reflects a few years of research at McMaster together with some master students. I think we had 2 master students on that project and a few undergrads. And involved is also Niels Rochow, who is currently still at McMaster, and my brother Gerhard, who is a chemist, PhD in chemistry. So this is McMaster Medical School. This is Nürnberg in Germany. It's a pretty big hospital. It's a general hospital. It's about 2,400 beds, so pretty big, and serves as the only provider for the region, for a catchment area of about 1 million people. The pediatric unit is not as big. We only have 100 beds, but about 42 or 45 neonatal beds. And amongst them, we have 18 true NICU, so level 3 beds. The rest is level 2+ and 2. And we also in the serving the area as well. I'm also the chief of a smaller hospital that is 40 kilometers away from McMaster, from Nürnberg, where we are providing service as well. So it's similar to the setup what I understood you have here. This is the view from this morning, 7:15 from my hotel room. Was beautiful. Slightly different from yesterday, because yesterday was much colder and very overcast. So I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you very much for letting me sleep and enjoy the view there. Good. So the objective of my talk, and unfortunately I took the slide out because I saw there's a similar audience from the geographics of my move. So the objectives of my talk here is to review underlying principles of growth and nutrition, to understand postnatal growth restriction and some of the reasons for it, to discuss the task to identify the appropriate postnatal growth trajectory. And again, this, like yesterday, this talk focuses mainly on, or only on preterm infants and more on ELBW babies than on VLBW babies. And you will see a few slides you have seen yesterday already. This statement from the AAP, how babies should grow postnatally. I repeat it because it's really very well written. Rates of growth should be achieved and body composition of weight gain for a normal fetus of the same postmenstrual age, and to maintain normal concentrations of blood and tissue nutrients. So composition of weight gain and normal concentrations of blood and tissue nutrients. That is one sentence, and as I said yesterday, it is easier said than done. Yesterday I led you through this slide, and I just here pull up the last one to say it's not only about weight gain, it's not only about organ differentiation to make that happen, but it's also to achieve the proper weight gain. And I would like to focus a little bit on does it matter the nature of weight gain at the end, or does it not matter? So the problem we were puzzled with is that all babies are losing weight after birth here, and then they restart to grow, they achieve the magical birth weight again, and then the question is, where should they grow here? Intrauterine, they would have grown here, but what is the appropriate growth trajectory for a baby after birth? Obviously, the red one is not the appropriate growth trajectory, though many units still struggle with having babies growing like these. But what is the right one? Is it this one, and this one? As I pointed out yesterday, a funny thing is here, if we are used at least to take growth rates in gram per kilogram per day, so weight gain in gram per kilogram per day, which not all units do. They don't calculate it every day or once per week, but we do, and I think it should be done. Then still the weight gain here is the same, and paradoxically, the growth rate has a difference here depending on where the baby grows, here or here. So the weight gain is the same, but the growth rate here is slower compared to here. Why? Here the denominator is 2,000. Here the denominator is 2,500. So the increase is the same, divided by 2,000 or divided by 2,500, we get up with a difference in weight gain of 25%. I wasn't aware of that before we start looking into this subject. So it's not only about weight gain to achieve the right weight, but because all these babies have more or less the same weight gain, but it's also that we need to know where should the baby grow here. So, I've said that. Sorry. Sorry. So, as I pointed out yesterday, does it matter where babies grow here? Yes, it matters. Let's see, the baby here at birth has 1,000 grams of birth weight. And then the lean mass, so the protein and water, is about 970 grams, and the baby has only 3% of fat mass here. So it basically has no fat. And then when we make the baby grow here, or here, is a little difference in lean mass, but it's a huge difference in fat mass. So babies here then have about 5%, 12 or 18% of fat mass. These are data from us because we can measure body composition. So at the end, it's not so much the increase in lean mass, in protein mass, but it is the composition of fat mass or percent fat mass on body weight. And does that matter? So this was this slide. Does appropriate body composition matter? At least she lives a healthy lifestyle, and maybe not a healthy lifestyle, and he's in danger as well, maybe. So does appropriate body composition matter? I will show you a few slides why it matters. It matters that we have enough fat in our body, because if we have the body fat is producing a hormone that is called leptin. And leptin enables the body to go down certain pathways. It's like to have enough thyroxine on board or enough cortisol. And you need to have enough leptin on board, and leptin is only produced in fat cells. So if there is not enough leptin, then certain central and cytokine enabling pathways are not switched on. White blood cells work better when they see levels of leptin, and certain other like the menstrual cycle or reproductive cycle is only being switched on if you have enough body fat on board, because it doesn't make sense that you become into a reproductive state, get a baby, and you have no body fat from an evolutionary perspective. So too low body fat is not good. And there is also a very recent, it was from 2015, published in Science, where they found that the subcutaneous fat cells are directly involved in fighting Staph aureus skin infections. And they do it via a certain molecule that they are producing that directly kills bacteria. And they've shown that in cell cultures, they've shown that in mice, and they've shown it also in humans. So to have a little bit fat under the skin is something that is good. Obviously not too much, because if we have too much body fat, then we are prone to early onset of adult metabolic, neurologic and cardiovascular disorders, which is called nowadays DOHA, Developmental Origins of Health and Disease. So at the end, to create a baby with an appropriate weight, but also appropriate body composition is very important. Here are a few other information about what early growth and also body composition does to us. These are data from a Finnish cohort those were Finnish men that were born in 1924 to 1933, and they have very good birth registries there up in Scandinavia. And what they looked at is what was the body composition of the baby at birth, here expressed as ponderal index, which is basically weight divided by the length, as a cubic function, and the body mass index, so growth at the pubertal periods at the age of 11. And you see that the highest risk for coronary heart disease is here for babies that were being born small and then grew very well afterwards. So accumulated relative amount of fat mass. Whereas those babies that were relatively heavy at birth, but were slim at at 11 years have a much lower risk. There's those data. There are a few other publications on that, like this one from Barker, who also created the Barker hypothesis about this DOHAT phenomenon, shows here the trajectories for adults that suffered from coronary heart disease, and these are men and these are women. And here again, from birth to the prepubertal stage here. And what you see here is that the height is below average. The weight is also below average, but before puberty, the weight increases much more than the length gain. And that leads to an increase in BMI. And these infants and these subjects are at risk for coronary events. And that is the same for women as well. Does that matter? It matters because the growth patterns that we see in preterm babies, and these are data from Sarah Sehgal from McMaster, she has a cohort of babies that she's now following up until the age of 35 because they were being treated in the 80s. These are data she published in 2006 about longitudinal growth of these preemies. And what you see here is males, here's females, this is weight, height, and BMI. And for men here you see the same thing, so that the weight is coming down below average and then is going up much faster than the height goes up, so that the BMI also increases prepubertally during the prepubertal period. And that is the same also for women. So this growth pattern puts preterm babies at risk to experience the same thing what we see from these cohorts from Scandinavia. And there is another study here published 2012 from Professor Kerkhoff in the Netherlands. She also followed up preterm babies here from birth term up to the age of 21 years and looked at different growth patterns. Those babies that had a more rapid catch-up growth, and those who remained small and then had a more moderate growth towards normal. And what you see here is that this is for weight, this is for height, and this is for the difference in the standard deviation scores. And what you see here, that these babies that have or these individuals that have a faster growth here, at the end have problems. They have more body fat, they have a larger waist circumference, and they have problems with high triglyceride levels, cholesterol, and LDL. So growth patterns matter at the end for later outcome and can significantly increase or decrease our life expectancy, troubles indirect for the family and also for the society, and also come with costs at the end. So I showed you this slide from Rich Ehrenkrantz, where growth data were pulled together like a kind of normative idea how babies could grow, and but we were not happy with that, because we said that cannot be that babies grow like this. And as I showed you before, we need to find some physiological babies, some physiological rationale how babies should grow. So what are the reasons for this growth retardation? First, this is about the significance. 33% of babies in this study were SGA at birth, and 63, it's not me.
It'll go away.
Okay, and at discharge, 63% of the babies were SGA at birth. So another a strong hint that currently we are not doing a very good job as a neonatal society, and putting babies maybe at the risk by achieving the wrong risk pattern. So if we look a little bit closer into how does it come that a cohort in a unit maybe on average shows this growth, is that at the end we have three populations of babies in there that we are treating. One is the population of very sick infants. Maybe they got a shortcut because they got a neck and they cannot really grow very well, but then there is a physiological reason. Or they have a severe BPD or any other kind of problems. So this is this kind of babies, but that is a smaller part nowadays. Maybe 20 years ago, we had more babies with shortcut and with severe BPD. Nowadays, with better prenatal care, with better perinatal care and more gentle approaches, I think this number of babies is going down. The other group that you treat in a unit are these babies that basically give no problems to you. They are being born, they adapt, and they go through like a miracle. You like them as well, and you see them as well in the unit. And these babies can grow like this because they are healthy, they got the appropriate nutrition, and they have a skilled team that took care and let babies grow like this and was not afraid to achieve such growth rates. And then there is a third group of babies that fall maybe in between, and that's maybe the majority worldwide, that are basically healthy infants, and they could grow more like this if there would be a skilled team, but unfortunately the team is not paying too much attention, or because they get inappropriate nutrition, maybe due to a lack of knowledge or due to the nature of the nutrition that the baby gets. So putting all that together, the factors contributing to postnatal growth retardation is know-how, taking care of it, nutrition, so what do I choose to feed babies? And yesterday we heard about target fortification and about problems with breast milk and how to overcome them. And the third thing is the journey. I call it the journey through no man's land or nowhere land, and I will come to that a little later. So let's now first focus on the know-how. So this factor, know-how, that contributes to postnatal growth retardation, I call it the human factor or the art of feeding, and basically has to do with delayed enteral feeding and prolonged use of TPN. Can you influence growth? This is a study published in 2005 where 15 US centers, relatively large centers, were compared according to their growth rates achieved. And here you see it depicted towards the length of stay. And they calculate growth rate here from birth, interestingly. That's why they have negative growth rates here during the first 14 to 21 days, and not so high growth rates as we would like to see, 17 to 21 here, because they take the initial dip into account here as well. That is should not be done that way, but it was done in this study. At the end, it doesn't matter. It shows that you have, for the same length of stay where babies are being discharged, a huge variation in postnatal growth and in weight gain achieved. Here from 3 to up to 15, that's a factor of 5. And when you group them here, then you see there are units that are not doing so well, and there are units that are doing much better. So there is an inter-unit variability, and this is operator dependent. So it depends on what you do, what philosophy you have in your unit about feeding, and whether you focus. This should not go there. That is wrong. So it has to do with introducing enteral feeds as well. And here you see data from McMaster. We had a pretty reasonable feeding protocol here, starting with non-nutritive feeds at 2 until 5, so a little bit, and then went up by 20 per kg, so that at the end, at around day 14, all babies should have been on enteral feeds. That was the reality being achieved in babies between 750 and 1,000 grams. So we didn't do what we were supposed to do. We did it here, but we didn't increase as fast as we thought we should have done. And it's a little slow. And this is for babies below 750 grams. You see how much we delayed enteral feeds. And this has to do with postnatal growth retardation, because the caloric density of enteral food is much higher than anything we can give the babies via TPN. So it's very slow. This slide should be here. So this is about auditing. And there is another paper here from France where they looked into 29 NICUs. They all were university NICUs. And looked into, we have a certain amount that we would like to get because we have some guidelines. And what at the end did we achieve? And then they found that during the first 14 days of life in this group of kids, they found that they had 10.9 gram per kilogram deficit of amino acids that they could not bring in or didn't bring in, and with the energy 480 kilocalories per kilogram cumulative energy deficit, though they had guidelines and thought they would adhere to it. And interestingly, the rate of extrauterine growth restriction was here also in the range of about 24%. So they were surprised as well that they didn't achieve their intake. So now let's have a look into what are we doing in neonatal care. And I simplify very much here, but we are working together with our colleagues from maternal fetal medicine and obstetrics. And I don't know whether anyone from this specialty is here in the room, but our wish to these guys would be that with the fetuses that we then get and take care of, that they minimize prenatal inflammation and lack of oxygen. That is basically what the obstetrician should do. And then please hand us over the fetus here. And then the amount of lung disease, of lung immaturity defines the amount of respiratory support that we need to give. If a baby is doing very well, we might need only a little bit of CPAP or whatever. If the baby is more sick, we might need more. So this determines the degree of intensive care that the baby gets. These interferes with how quick can we build up enteral feeds. And there are lots of beliefs about how we should do it or what we should not do it. But the more sick the baby is, the less fast we go ahead with enteral feeds here. And the length of introducing enteral feeds here defines the number of line-related sepsis. And then when you have a sepsis, and you are lucky here because you have that pretty much under control, from which I learned from my last visit, and that you even became a national role model, which I congratulate you for. But still, I'm talking about what is happening in units, also in other units. Once you have a sepsis and maybe you need to intubate the baby, then you start here at square one again. And so you have this vicious cycle where some units don't come out so easily. So at the end, it means take the minimum respiratory support here, start feeding as quick as possible, see that you get as few line days as possible, then you have lower sepsis rates, and then this vicious cycle is being interrupted. And now we need to talk about what factors have an impact on the introduction and advancement of enteral feeds. And that is number of feeds, starting time point, do we do trophic feeds, advancement of feeds, significance of clinical parameters like gastric residuals, abdominal girth, passage of meconium. There's more and more data coming now showing the usefulness or non-usefulness of these parameters. So there is a lot of questions that we have with this introduction and advancement of enteral feeds, and there is anxiety, angst, beliefs, local habits, and culture in a unit as well, which you cannot fight with papers, with know-how, because it sits there like a kind of, I don't know, karma in that unit. I experienced that myself on different occasions as well. So now the question is that what drives these angst, anxiety, beliefs, local habits, and culture is that we are afraid of PDA and we are afraid of neck. So we have a neckophobia and a PDA-ophobia. So, but there are no real good data that the PDA is triggered so much about how do you increase enteral feeds. TFI, yes, but it is more background inflammation or sepsis rates that keep the PDA open, and not enteral feeds. The other thing is necrotizing enterocolitis. We are terribly afraid because it's a terrible condition. But does that really justify that we withhold enteral feeds just because we have 1 or 2 milliliters of gastric residuals and then expose the babies to sepsis? And the number of sepsis episodes overall, if you count that, are much more severe than a potential neck case that you would avoid. And the data don't give that evidence that enteral feeds and the way how you introduce enteral feeds has anything to do with necrotizing enterocolitis and that you can prevent. So I would review a little bit of literature about that, introducing of enteral feeds. The delayed advancement of enteral feeds promote intestinal inflammation. Fast advancement, 40 milliliters per kilogram versus 15 to 24, does not increase the risk for necrotizing enterocolitis, but it reduces mortality and decreases the risk of sepsis. I will show you this from data from the German neonatal network. That is a pretty good thing that has been established maybe 10 years ago. Wolfgang Göpel from the University of Lübeck created a registry where they have now 6,000 or 7,000 preterm babies in there, including genetic information and whatever. And they did here a study in 1,400 babies where they divided these babies in slow advancers and fast advancers. And the cutoff being used here is 12.5 days. And the difference, what they found, was a difference in sepsis rate here. And the sepsis rates were much higher here, late onset sepsis, much higher early and sepsis, much higher compared to the fast advances. So this supports the hypothesis that number of line days and the velocity or the speed or the dynamics of introducing enteral feeds has something to do with sepsis rates. So this is our data from Camille Martin. She looked into intestinal inflammatory markers in babies that were on late initial feeding or on early initial feeding, and she found differences in diverse interleukin parameters in favor of a faster introduction, earlier introduction of enteral feeds than to delay it. So that means delayed advancement of enteral feeds promotes intestinal inflammation, and that might contribute to necrotizing enterocolitis, because anything that happens at the gut is a fine balance between of immunological reactions, and these intestinal inflammation could shift the whole thing towards more inflammation and higher risk of necrotizing enterocolitis. Then we have Cochrane reviews about fast and slow advancement. Again, fast advancement does not increase the risk for necrotizing enterocolitis. It is even a little bit more in favor, but it reduces mortality significantly. So we need to get rid of our anxiety to introduce feeds and to advance them a little faster and not to withhold them too long. And it decreases the risk of sepsis. Sorry, mortality was the other one. These are data from our own study where we did a nutritional intervention and at the end introduced enteral feeds much faster as one of the concepts. And I come to a few other of these data a little later. But the most important thing is that you see that with this slow advancing, we had 19 out of 124 VLBW babies getting a sepsis. And with the faster advancements, it was only 7 out of 119. So highly significant reduction sepsis rate only by reducing the number of line days and by shortening the number of up to full oral feeds here. These are data from McMaster, where we had sepsis rates here, 5 per 1,000 patients. Relatively high, and then we started to work on it, and it came down here relatively nicely. This is until May 2016. I have the data, and a part of this was done because we increased hand hygiene, but a part was also decreased because we changed our nutritional management. Babies were much faster on enteral feeds, and we decreased the number of line days. And the good thing is it was sustainable. So a lot of interplay between how do you advance enteral feeds and what does it have to do with sepsis rates. And I'm not talking about your wonderful situation here. I'm talking about what will be many units will be experiencing. There's also the question, when shall we introduce fortifiers? And there are no general recommendations. And if you look a little bit through what has been published, there are only thoughts. And here Stefan Polberger from Sweden says it's usually initiated at a daily enteral milk intake of 17 milliliters per kilogram. Many units wait until 120 or 140, and then 3 days on enteral feeds, and then we introduce the fortifiers. But you can start them a little earlier. And there's a recent paper from Tillman here who introduced human milk fortification from the time of the first feeding. Already the first feeds with human milk fortifier, and that was very well tolerated. So showing as a kind of proof of principle that you could start with human milk fortification directly after birth. Funnily, the babies didn't have a difference in weight or in growth, most likely because now they cut the parental support back. But anyways, this shows that human milk fortification can be introduced much earlier. Why do I tell you all that? To take away the fear, I don't know whether you have it in your unit, to introduce enteral feeds to preterm babies, even to very tiny ones. So these are other data showing that you can improve growth by focusing on how do you feed babies. We are still talking about the know-how, right? And we did a study here that was published 2012 in Clinical Nutrition, still from Greifswald, where I was responsible before I moved to Canada. And what we did here is we had 243 babies, and was a historical, so it was a study with a historical control. So we had about 120 babies in each arm, and was a so to say before-after trial. And we changed the way how we did feed the babies. Parenteral nutrition, we started faster and with 1.5 gram of amino acids and fat versus 1.0 what we had before. We went much faster, we increased much faster, and also the maximum intake was increased for amino acids and lipids. And for the enteral intake, we started feeding the babies already at 6 hours of life, and we did increase the feeds much faster so that we came down, and we also accepted a maximum intake up to 200 milliliters per kilogram per day in babies that were tolerating, that were not too lung sick.
Can you discuss very briefly what you consider tolerance or intolerance of feeding? Because sometimes we have these very vague things like they spit up or they have a little distension, especially moms don't like to see their babies spitting up. But what would you call tolerance versus intolerance? Sometimes we have a little trouble getting advancements going because of a perception.
Yeah, so that would easily fill up a day, I think. So with these distensions, so overall you need to see on what kind of support is the baby on. Is the baby intubated or is the baby on CPAP? Distensions on CPAP, for me, have a different meaning compared to a baby that is ventilated. Let's start maybe with gastric residuals, because that is where most people look into. So we personally, we accept 5 milliliters per kilogram as gastric residuals as normal. And we don't care for anything that is below 5. We feed the babies, continue feeding. And if the baby would be intolerant, then it might spit up. Then we would examine the belly and would see what is it about. And did the baby stool, is the baby on CPAP and whatever. But we would basically accept 5 milliliters per kilogram. What we realized, and what I also realized at McMaster, where we had also this enteral feeding introductionophobia as well, that 1-2 milliliters of gastric residuals, and then we stopped. So they also wanted to have 0 or just a little bit. And the physiology is that these babies produce saliva like crazy. And there are a few milliliters as a physiological amount in the belly. And there are more and more papers coming out now showing that. So that is basically what we would accept. And then the problem is always coming to the first 40, 50 milliliters per kg. Once you are there, babies rarely after that show any kind of problems, or we don't perceive them as problems anymore. We are much more sensitive for the first 40 milliliters, interestingly, per kg. And once you are there, the rest goes through like very quickly. So you need to really focus on the first 40 milliliters or 20 milliliters, that you don't get puzzled too much, that you have a clear guidelines at the end, and encourage people not to be worried about 2 or 3 milliliters at the end. If a baby throws continuously up, of course, you examine the belly. You would like to see that there is no malformation or whatever, and there is no inflammation, no peritonitis or whatever. Then that's a different story. Then you might want to withhold a little bit. That's what we do as well. But with this, you can really nicely decrease the time to full feeds. Is that helpful?
There was a randomized trial at the University of Florida. There was less than 100 patients, Joe knew of, looking at residuals or not looking at residuals, and it showed absolutely no difference, no higher risk for neck or anything. Although the power, so to speak, was relatively low because it wasn't, hundreds of patients. It was smaller. That is one of the hardest things to eradicate or make sense of.
But it really puts babies at risk, because this constant on-off, what does it do to the gut? Yeah, you put 5 or how many milliliters in, and then, oh no, we keep NPO for 12 hours. So nothing is in that belly all of a sudden. So if I would be an enterocyte, I would be completely confused at the end. So I don't think that we are doing any good there. We also published a study just right now, still in McMaster, where we looked into babies above 1,000. So bigger babies for the significance of gastric residuals. And you can forget it, basically. It has nothing to do. Also, abdominal girth, I find it's not really helpful. Yeah, if you have a necrotizing or a special condition, yes. But otherwise, if a baby is on CPAP, so this was what we did in this study, and I show you now the growth data. So this is for babies below 26 weeks, or 25 weeks and younger. You see that we increased, so this is the control group, and this is the study group. So this was the old, this is a new approach. So you see these babies were experiencing a little bit of postnatal growth retardation. These weren't. Body length increased a little bit, and head circumference increased a lot. And I can assure you it was not water that increased the head circumference, because all babies had an ultrasound, obviously, and there was no hydrocephalus babies in this study here. So the head circumference grew better. And there are other groups now, like Thibaut Santerre, Axel Franz, and others that show the same thing. If you focus on feeds, you achieve better growth, and it's very frequently to the benefit of better head growth. Now we also measured body composition data, because we had a DEXA machine there, so we have really reliable body composition, because I validated that device in piglet experiments. So what you see here for the different gestational ages is a different body composition. The black one is always the lean mass. This is the fat mass. This is the bone mineral density. So you see here always an increase of the lean mass. Here it is the same, but an increase of lean mass. And you see also a little increase of fat mass, but not a lot. And here you have a comparison group of 150 term babies, SGA, AGA, and LGA. And you see that these AGA babies have approximately the same amount of body fat than our preterm babies that we sent home. LGA babies have higher percent body fat, and SGA babies have lower percent body fat. So we thought, in terms of body composition, we maybe did a acceptable job. It's just confusing me. That's why that's why I'm stopping. So yesterday I mentioned this paper from Anne Janvier from Montreal, and she published it in, what was it, 2015 or so, around that, and where she also focused on better nutrition, and she also accepted up to 170 milliliters per kilogram per day, which is revolutionary for Canada, because they are very much stuck to 150 milliliters. And I think it's the right way, and she found a big difference here in weight as discharge. And there is now a potpourri here of papers coming out, giving a growing body of evidence about prevention of postnatal growth restriction by focusing on practice and by focusing on nutrition and on growth of the baby in the unit. So how can you be supported? We in Greifswald, we developed a computer-based nutritional program already in 2004 and 5 and used it as laptops on wheels in the unit. And basically, we plotted the growth of these babies. Every day was in there, and we immediately saw when the babies were deviating from their anticipated growth trajectory. And then we adjusted feeds. We also had the milliliters per kilogram shown, and also the caloric density with assumed nutritional composition of the breast milk that is being fed. And we did that also for length and for head circumference. Here we had daily measurements, here we had weekly measurements. And we found really that was very helpful. And there are a few other reports now that I would like to go through with you, and you might have the same system in the unit, where they introduced a computer calculation program for individualized parental nutrition. This is from Vienna, from Innsbruck, I'm wrong. Basically, they had these reasonable amounts that they would like to achieve, then had some printouts with that, and then did a study, conventional group and the computer-based group, both about 50 to 60 babies in this group, 11 to 1200 grams of birth weight. And you see that they increased the protein intake. This is always cumulative amounts. They increased the fat intake a lot. Glucose didn't matter a lot, but more protein, more fat. If you remember what I said yesterday, that must have led to a better growth, because you have not only more protein, but also more energy. And this is indeed what they showed here. They showed here that the babies in the conventional group, 70% were AGA at birth, but only 14 at discharge. So they lost a lot into this small for gestation age, so this postnatal growth retardation. Whereas in the computer-supported group, the same amount of AGA at birth, but only 44%. So they did a much, much better job with it. For length and head circumference, they didn't find a difference. Maybe the numbers were too small, or the observation period, because that is sometimes hard to measure reliably. There's a lot of noise in it. This is another report from Sweden, and our friends from Milk Analyzer know about it. And one guy, Albrecht Brückner, was a former resident of mine in Greifswald. So he worked with these guys here. And that is basically a similar thing, but they also graphically visualize where are you with your different intakes. Are you green? Okay, relax. Are you yellow? So be careful. And here you should be worried because you don't get enough. So that helps you. That helps you a lot. And I like that. And we might introduce that in Nürnberg maybe in the future. They did a study and published that in terms of energy, in terms of carbs, amino acids, not fatty acids, interestingly here, they get a better intake. And they also have growth data here about weight, length, and head circumference. This time here all with statistically significant differences. They achieve a better growth with computer-aided nutrition. We recently published also a paper here in Nutrients with guidelines for feeding of very low birth weight infants, where we reviewed all rationale about these feeds withholding and PDA and whatever, which is very nicely quoted now. Good. So my summary for the know-how part is improving postnatal growth is possible. We just need to do it. I think that was a former president that said it, right? So the next part is nutrition. And I won't go into details there because we discussed that a little bit later. just to give you an overview in what beautiful times we are living now. 30 years ago, we had mother's own milk. We had formula. That was all. We didn't have donor milk. Yeah, some areas had. So the former GDR part of Germany had very well working milk banks. So donor milk, but they didn't have preemies to care for because they didn't do that at that time. We have now human milk with human milk fortifier. We have donor milk with human milk fortifier. We have human milk with human milk fortifier. And what was HMNTF? Total, no. Yeah, yeah, maybe that. I don't know. it meant something. And we might have in future formula with human milk oligosaccharides as well. And all these have a different outcomes on necrotizing, sepsis and death, on growth and on neurodevelopment. So we really need to look into these details as well, because they have an impact. What I would like to focus now on is what I call the journey through no man's land or nowhere land. And what I mean with it is taking again these Ehrenkranz graph. You see here the 10th and the 50th percentile, and these are these published growth patterns. As I said yesterday, if that would happen in a 4-year-old child, it would deviate from its percentile here. We would be very much concerned that the baby might be very sick, has an underlying disease, gut disease or whatever, or any diabetes or whatever, anything severe, or it would be subject to child abuse because it is not growing very well. In neonatal care, we have been used to it, but I think things are changing. But still, we have no clue where these babies should grow. And this is what I call the journey through no man's land. We have intrauterine growth trajectories. We don't know what do we do postnatally. Where should the baby adjust to? And we put a lot of work into trying to solve that problem. And it is somehow preliminary, but I think it's relatively sound and would like to present that to you. So what we do in neonatal care is that we use these Fenton charts. And I heard that Tennis was here a while ago, and that part of that work that I present to you, we have also done together with her. So the Fenton charts, and then we plot here weekly or daily or whatever the weight that we took, and then we are more or less happy if it looks like this. We are not so happy if it goes like this. But still, we don't know what is the right way. Now, how have these growth charts being constructed? And maybe Tennis said it. These are intrauterine measurements that have been taken as weight that has been taken from preterm babies with known gestational ages, and then basically the distribution has been plotted from week to week and then has been smoothed and extrapolated. So that's why we have a 50s, a 90s, and 97 percentile. But those are all more or less, especially in this area, pathological birth as well. So that's maybe why we have this belly here, because there is more pathology in here. And also these Z-scores here are a little, or the percentiles are a little wider here relatively compared to here. So there might be more pathology in there. Okay, anyways, that is the best what we have just right now, intrauterine postnatally cross-sectional data. For postnatal kids born at term, we have the WHO growth charts standards. And those are these ones. And you see the same percentiles, 97, 90, 50, 10, and 3rd percentile for these babies. But they don't match with the intrauterine. It's not frustrating. It's very easy to explain. Why does that happen? So what Tennis did is she did an overlay of these two, which I did here, and then took a ruler and connected from 34 to 50 weeks, more or less straight, and gave us an idea how a baby from in utero might transition into infancy somehow, and gives us an idea. We didn't have anything better. It was great, but it didn't help us with individual babies to say how should they grow. So Now, let's review what happens here. Let's assume a baby, term baby, undisturbed pregnancy, goes until term. The baby most likely grows somehow on his percentile. I'm only talking about those babies that do not deviate from their genetic potential. So they grow on this percentile, then here birth happens, and then the babies lose weight postnatally, and then they start to regain weight. And that is where these postnatal growth trajectories kick in. And this is why we have this shift. And this is different for the different percentiles. Interestingly, it is larger for lower percentiles than it is for the higher ones. You would expect it the other way around, but it is not. And that leads to a problem, and I will show you why. So this is a phenomenon that happens once in a lifetime in a term baby. In a preterm baby, this happens here. And why does it happen? Because at term, we have something that we call TCs. This is term contraction of extracellular spaces. And I come to that a little later. And in preterm babies, we call it preterm contraction of extracellular spaces. If we go into that physiology, what happens when a baby is being born and loses weight? We typically see such a pattern somehow. Or depending on what kind of job we do, this trajectory goes in this way. But usually it's this way. So now let's focus on these first days. What happens here? So the baby in utero is on the placenta, maybe very well nourished. Growth is about 18 grams per kilogram per day. Postnatally, the baby is not very well nourished. We give parenteral nutrition, but that doesn't have the caloric density that we should get. The baby has maybe even a few more needs. So the baby is starving, so is not continuing to grow. But already after a short while, after a few days, we are on full parenteral feeds, and the baby should grow more or less, maybe not with 18, but at least it should grow. And then also enteral nutrition will kick in here, and then the baby should receive enough calories to continue this growth pattern. So now if we go into details here, then, this is the amount that you can calculate according to the nutritional deficit that the babies get. That is not a lot, because we are usually doing a pretty good job in providing babies with enough calories. But there is a second component underneath, that is this water loss phenomenon. And this water loss phenomenon is, there are very good data from Karl Bauer from Frankfurt and from a few North American data using stable isotopes. They measured the different water spaces in the body. And what they found is that the babies contract the extracellular fluid that is here, from here 470 to 370. The total body water went down, but because the extracellular went down, but not the intracellular volume. And the total body solids didn't change either. So this is a little bit underestimated, the effect, this irreversible one-time contraction of extracellular fluid space, and you don't recover from that. That is part of the postnatal adaptation. Now, this 30% contraction of extracellular volume, that is about a third or 40% of body weight, gives you about 8 to 12% of weight loss. It's exactly what we experience. So most of this here is loss of water, and this loss of water, you don't recover from it. You should not. If you do, something's wrong. So what we think is babies grow in utero on this percentile, then have this adaptation due to the term contraction of extracellular space. That explains these shifts. A preterm baby does this as well, but does it here, and doesn't do it here again, because here the postnatal transition happens. So now the question is, can we find this point for preterm babies? There are no data on that. And then say, you know what? A baby that grows on the 50th percentile until here also transitions to the 50th percentile postnatally. Anything else would not make sense. And there are data on that showing that most babies do that indeed. They stay on their percentile. There's a little bit of crisscross over, but it's not really a lot. So that means that a preterm baby should find this lost path here, somewhere here again. So now the question is, can we find this point? And can we construct a trajectory from here to here that can be used for any individual baby? then we are out of no man's land. Then we have some guidance for the clinician, what he can do, or she. Okay, so one more time. We need to find this point, and then we need to find the trajectory that leads towards this point, not to this one. Going back to the birth percent, to the intrauterine percentile would be wrong, because we replace the loss of water here by another substance, mostly fat, that the baby would need to lose, or it keeps it, but then it grows here. And that is not right. Then we have a wrong body composition with too much fat. So going back to the original percentile is wrong. But how can we achieve this percentile? So now what we did, we said we need to find this point. And what we did was the following. We said, let's focus on preterm babies that are very healthy and transition with nearly no help, or with a minimum of help. And let's take their weight trajectories and then see whether we find a pattern. So we did that. We worked together with MUMSI, so it's McMaster University Children's Hospital. That is the University of Heidelberg. That is Greifswald, my old unit. This is St. Mike's in St. Joe's. St. Mike's is in Toronto, and St. Joe's is also in Hamilton. These are advanced level 2 units. So we included 3,700 preterm babies below 35 weeks, and then defined what is a more or less healthy baby. So for the babies above 32 weeks, basically no oxygen, CPAP only for so and so long, no antibiotics, on full enteral feeds until then, and whatever. And for the tinier ones below 30 weeks, we had a slightly different criteria. That paper was published in Pediatric Research last year. So at the end, from these 3,700 kids, we looked through all the charts. We included 981. And then took all weight trajectories for the first 21 days. And then found the following. We first did it, these are all trajectories. We first did it in these 3 weeks here, from 34 to 36 weeks. And then found, goodness, they adjust like to a new percentile. We were blown away when we saw that. Then we went further down here and then saw the same thing happens. So we said, goodness, what is that? Is that a biological principle? And if you plot that as change in Z-scores, then you see for all these kids, regardless which gestational this is, gestational age this is, so these are the different weeks, you see they start here at 0, and then they lose 0.7 Z-scores, plus minus 0.7 Z-scores here, and adjust to this new percentile. And funnily, median, mean, standard deviation, interquartile ranges, all behaved the same. It was absolutely consistent. So we said, okay, that is maybe what it is. And this is the point at 7 days or 21 days. It doesn't change a lot. We developed a prediction equation so that we could find this new starting point after postnatal adaptation has completed. The funny thing on the side was that though we had babies in 5 different units and they had slightly different fluid management and nutritional protocols, there was no difference between these between the kids from these 5 units. Though they got some 10 to 20, 25 milliliters per kg different of intake. No difference for the weight, which means that these changes of water and water spaces can be in healthy babies regulated by the kidney, and we do not need to worry too much about it, whether we give 10 or 20 too much, right? That is very interesting, but this is only true for these healthy babies, which basically are 25%, so the upper 25%. But that was our role model, our model for normal physiology of a preterm baby. So now, with this in mind, we said, now we found this point. So now we said that we have found this point, we said, now can we create a trajectory that leads us to this point? What many people would do, that the baby now adjusts here to a new percentile, and you would follow this percentile. So we took that approach because that is common practice in units, that they try to then use that percentile where the baby adjusts to here, and then so we followed this percentile, and then we measured the difference to the target weight. And we did that for all gestational ages and for all major percentiles. And we used the second approach, where we said we go from this point, and now use daily Fenton growth data and apply it day by day, the median, day by day, and see where we end up with. And again, this delta from the target value to the one that we achieve by using this routine, where do we end up with? That has just been published, I think last week. So these are again the two approaches. You follow the new percentile, and you see where you achieve, where you come up with at 42 weeks, and you use this daily Fenton data, and then you deviate from that percentile. And those were the data that we used here in gram per kilogram per day. So now, what you see here is the difference of the target to the achieved weight at 42 weeks for the different percentiles and for the different gestational ages. And you see here, using the postnatal percentile approach, so you take the new percentile where the baby adjusts to and follow through, there is no system that you achieve your lost point at 42 weeks. It's all over the place. Then, when you apply the median Fenton growth rates, you see, oh, it becomes much more consistent, but it's still dependent from the gestational age where you start with, which might have to do with growth rates. So then we said, can we optimize that? Is there a factor that brings the variation here down close to zero? We did that and found we are coming close to zero. And we did that by simply introducing a correction factor for this extrauterine growth from this Fenton data by 1.0017. Sounds like not a lot, but this corrects. So we basically, with this trajectory that we create with this algorithm, we exactly hit the point where the baby should be. So then I said, what did we do there? Did we do there mass cosmetics, change just something nice by introducing? I said, what did we do there? And I said, you know what, 1.0017, the mean growth rate of babies is 1.017. We corrected that by 10%. We made it higher by 10%. And I said, why? And then all of a sudden, one morning, I got it. The growth rate of babies ex utero is 10% higher than of the corresponding fetus in utero. Why? Because the baby shifts down by the percentile. The slope is the same, but the denominator now is smaller. And the amount of protein is exactly the same in it. So that's why the baby needs to grow 10% more compared to the fetal rates. Nobody has shown that before. So that means it's the same effect like what I showed you with different growth rates. So 10% more. That means, oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, that will work. 5 years. So if that is true, then we said, now let's take, because we need to prove of principle that is right if we use this percentile. Then we said that the difference that the babies achieve at the end from their targeted weight, that should relate somehow to outcomes. And what we are currently doing is that we're plotting this difference of the achieved weight at discharge towards the target weight, towards outcomes like head circumference and length, like MDI and PDI, and like body composition measurements like percent body fat and also biochemical. And we would expect the following. As long as we are below our target weight, we are suboptimal with head circumference and length and with MDI and PDI. And the closer we come to the target, the better we should go. And then we should reach a saturation somehow. We can maybe go a little bit higher than the zero because there's always little room for improvement also in biological systems. But as far as what the biochemical values are concerned, they should go in a different way, like this. And we are currently doing that. We are getting, we are getting data. I come to that a little later from different units, and are exactly plotting that and finding these expected correlations. But I can't show the data yet. What we did here is that we took the body composition data, so percent body fat here, as deviation from target weight. So the closer they were, the better. And you see with the proposed model here, our percent body fat are relatively equally distributed around 0, and they have reasonable amounts of fat mass, whereas we don't have that with the 2 other approaches. So that was the first hint that that model might be right. Okay, I skip this one. So at the end, we create these individualized trajectories now for our babies and put a certain interval in here to show the clinician where the baby should be heading to. And it doesn't matter whether the baby got 1 sepsis, no sepsis, 5 sepsis, or whatever. You should come close to this target trajectory. We are also right now looking into the area under the curve. If babies are dancing around like here or are undulating or whatever, does it have to do does it correlate with later outcome? So basically, we are creating these charts now, and then we can say, okay, this most likely is a true intrauterine growth retardation. This most likely is not an intrauterine growth retardation, though the baby is growing below the 10th percentile, but started above the 10th percentile. So it gets a little bit a new definition of this. So I would like to talk to you about something that we should do with this approach as well, not only go for weight, but also create the same charts for the different body compartments, because at the end, that is what matters. But we don't have that data yet prepared, but we will see that in future. So 5 minutes, we said, that works. Summary. Individualized postnatal growth trajectories can be predicted, provide a new reference point, and allow clinicians to guide growth. Preliminary validation results appear reasonable. The correction factor of 1.0017 in the growth velocity approach corresponds to a 10% increase of the daily growth velocity. And the physiological correlate for this 10% correction may be that the one-time contraction of body water of 10% virtually enhances postnatal growth rate as expressed per new body weight to ensure same absolute growth of protein mass. Or in other words, postnatal growth rates are about 10% higher compared to intrauterine growth rates. So we need to talk about 19 to 20 instead of 17. So next steps are validate growth calculator in a larger sample size. We got the data, as I said, from Canada, McMaster, from Germany, from Nürnberg, Rostock, Dresden, and from the German Neonatal Network. We got the data from the Adelaide Genie study from Maria Macredes, and we got data from Sweden, and maybe, hopefully, from Wilmington. We can feed them in, would be very nice, using these data. And would like to implement this in clinical practice to monitor and adjust growth of preterm infants who did not deviate from their genetic potential as a fetus. I know that. Test hypothesis whether short and long-term outcome will improve with this implementation. So 2 more slides. Essential of growth and nutrition, because we are not only talking about this model, but about avoiding growth retardation. Be knowledgeable about the impact of growth on later outcome. Know about the basics of nutritional needs. Make growth and nutrition part of your daily rounds. Understand that this is harder to catch up from lost opportunities. So if you don't achieve 17 grams, then you don't achieve 21 that you would need to catch up from lost opportunities. Provocative statement, but I think it's right. Nutrition starts on day 1 and on hour 1 after birth. In the initial phase of regaining birth weight, or better, don't stop postnatal growth process is extremely important. Audit your practice regularly about the intake achieved and the growth achieved. Feeding guidelines and a nutritional program improve growth. Computer-based programs help with daily rounds and facilitate auditing. And in future, hopefully, individualized growth trajectories will help with guiding clinicians to achieve appropriate postnatal growth patterns. And they do not replace the Fenton curves, the Fenton data. The Fenton data are the basis on it, right? Yeah, I've shown that yesterday. Basically similar people, same people. And again, thank you very much for your attention.
Barbara, you can close the rooms.
I can close the room. If there's questions, it can take time.
Thank you. Ms. Meekler is the administrator of the Women's Institute. Thank you for coming. Okay, questions. We got a lot of work to do. Okay, first of all, we hate to keep bringing this up, but we have impacted minimally our growth restriction postnatally. Part of it, I think the solution is simple. We're too afraid of giving more to feed, and I think we need to get hold of that. Moreover, I think that we're going to need more aggressive involvement from the nutrition team.
Donna's question too, they hold for residuals.
Yeah. So it's not one
5
thing,
per
it's a
kilo is a
variety
great number.
thing.
And there's literature on that.
Yeah. We clearly want to be engaged with you. And just so you know, we've just submitted or finished collecting all the data for Tanis Fenton. She's validating growth trajectories and so on, just like that. And we have 3 years worth of data that we're sending. Because a key point is what Dr. Fuchs said. If you don't audit and look at what you're doing, you have no idea. You think you're doing it great, and we're not.
Right.
There's a lot of room for improvement. So, any specific questions?
I have a question, and I'm non-medical. I'm a parent of a former 25-week preemie. But what percentage of your ELBW and DLBW moms are providing mother's own milk? Just wondering how that compares to maybe what our numbers are. It's higher.
We aim for 100, but we don't get 100. There are unfortunately sometimes medical reasons, and some parents, some mothers don't want. I would say, I don't have the data yet, but our gut feeling, maybe 70%.
Mother, son, and then the rest use donor?
We are starting to use donor. We not yet, but because we didn't have access to it, but we will. In McMaster, we basically had also around 80%, and the rest, or 90%, the rest was then donor from Toronto Milk Bank. Yeah.
Perhaps a good signal is Dr. Fuchs is part of a study he showed yesterday with Deborah O'Connor, several Canadian NICUs large, and there they compared taking mother's milk and whether to add donor milk or formula, and they were looking at a variety of things. But the baseline mother's milk, although it was a little bit of a select population, was at least 2/3. So I think that we are trying. I think we need to do better, but here the moms need to opt out. Less than 1,500 grams, it will either be mother's own or we'll get consent to get donors. So if they don't want it, they opt out and we'll go to formula for less than 1,500 grams.
So you made that your medical standard.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's great.
I want to do that as well in our unit.
Provided that, and that we understand, and some of that he touched upon yesterday, that donor milk is, this is a metaphoric term, it's a little bit of watered down mother's own. So we need to be mindful that we're going to have to tweak it and know what's in it. Otherwise, we'll be short.
Yeah, that's true.
No, excellent.
Just because it's made so
late. Support person, she works with the family support group, helps us to increase follow-up. Family coming back to follow up. And
that's good.
plus, she's been
important.
there. She had it.
So you're the ambassador.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
That's awesome.
It's great.
Any other?
Congratulations that you have that. That was a lot of hard stuff, I know. I apologize, but some food for thought.
No. Crystal, this was terrific. We said yesterday, unless we critically look at nutrition, which we do with 100% of our babies, we are not going to get to where we need to go. And there's data from you and others that shows if you don't get here, how many IQ points are you depriving that kid of, probably for the rest of their lives. So, we have an absolute captive population for 2 or 3 months where what they get depends 100% on us.
And you keep them until the end here. You discharge from here.
We discharge
most of them.
The overwhelming. We do transfer some back to referring places. So, but we also, the majority of the transports in go back to places where we practice too.
So we look into growth every day, and if the babies start to slow down, and we see that already after 1 to 2 days, we immediately increase. We don't wait. So because if you do that, then you have this step function, and you fall behind them. So we do that immediately, unless there are reasons not doing it, but that rarely happens.
I came from a unit in Atlanta recently, and we advanced our feedings much faster. Most of our babies had to leave by 35 weeks. They couldn't figure out how to get the insurance to pay longer. So by the time they were 35 weeks, we were trying to have them to be at 4 pounds or more. And we didn't find but a few babies that couldn't tolerate the faster advance.
Yeah.
And even though we've set our guidelines, we modified it a little bit, and I think we need to modify it a little bit more. Notice that he said starting fortification at about 60. There's at least a couple of studies that have started, randomized trials that have started from the word go, very low, and the data in Iowa from Dr. Siegler, who's a big name in nutrition, they fortified from the word go. And yet we nudged it down from about 100 to 80, and I'm not sure how consistent that occurs. So, this is not one intervention. This is a whole bunch of systems approach, improving a little here, a little here, a little here.
Exactly. It's not the one thing that changes it. It's a lot of fine tuning. Yeah. And why not starting with bigger babies and just say let's see, we ignore it and start with the babies above 1,000 or so, and get a feeling for it, and then all of a sudden you see, oh, you know what? And that's like you start with 27 weekers with CPAP, which we haven't done before at a certain time, and then you see, oh, it works well, so now we do this 26 weekers, now we do the 25 weekers or whatever. So it's if there's I was impressed by the amount of anxiety in McMaster and also other units about this introduction of feeds and gastric residuals and feeding intolerance and so on, and classifying as at feeding intolerance, which is wrong. Yeah, so but you need to get rid of, and this anxiety is hard to get rid of, because you have one baby that is the trouble, and everybody says that is because we changed practice. No, most likely not, right? Because you had the same number of babies before.
Yep.
So much selective perception there. If you buy a Prius in silver, next day you see only Prius in silver driving around, no other cars. It's funny.
Okay.
So I wanted everyone to know that now in the NICU conference room, we're going to have